there will come a point where no job is needed. You can have a job if you want to have a job. The AI will be able to do everything.
AI could wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs in the next 1 to 5 years.
I'm about to graduate college, and I'm so worried there's going to be no jobs left for me.
Welcome to AI Unplugged, the future of work, unlocking the promise and peril of the algorithmic age.
Executive Chairman and co-founder of Baypine, a private equity firm focused on unlocking technology upside in traditional businesses. Before that, he co-founded and served as chairman, co-CEO, and co-managing partner of Silver Lake, one of the world's largest technology-focused private equity firms. Dave began his career as an entrepreneur, then went on to senior leadership roles at Oracle and Lotus. He's also a philanthropist who, among other good works, provided with his wife, Barbara, a $200 million gift to create the Roux Institute at Northeastern University in Portland, Maine, and has raised an additional over $1.5 billion. This is an institute dedicated to graduate education and research in AI, digital engineering, and technology. But most importantly, I'm grateful to call Dave a friend and a mentor. Dave, welcome to AI Unplugged, the future of work.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with a very basic question. Is the hype real?
Well, the hype for sure is real. The question is the underlying technology as good, as important, and as likely to be influential as everybody claims? And I think it's actually going to be bigger and more important because I think it's going to create a structural change in the economy and broadly in the labor force.
Is it as big as the steam engine? Bigger than the steam engine?
Oh, I think it's substantially larger than, I think it's bigger than the automation of agriculture, which took employment from 50% down to, I think it's under 2% today in the United States.
And that took 150 years?
That long?
I think it's going to take at least a generation and maybe two for us to see the full impact of this new technology. It's not really dissimilar from what happened with semiconductors. Mm-hmm. Remember, those were invented in the 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. We saw the really commercial introduction in the 60s. Here we are, 70 years later, really just seeing the full flowering of that technology. Mm-hmm. This is, I think, as important and maybe more so.
I get the impression that this is going to be profoundly disruptive to working people very soon. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that the application will vary over time, it will grow over time. Who is exposed to that disruption sooner rather than later, and then who, as you see it today, is less likely to be exposed?
Good question.
And I'm not even sure that's the right term, exposed.
Let me take a step back. I think there's going to be, you can think about it by industry, and you can think about it by job category. Right? By industry, what's unique about AI and why it's different than most of the technologies, really all of the major technology changes that have come before us, is that it is hyper-evolving. Now, it's getting rapidly better, way faster. Moore's Law had us improving semiconductors every 18 months to 2 years. Mm-hmm. This is going at 3 or 5 times the speed, radically faster. It's also getting dramatically cheaper. The other thing that's happening is that it's autonomous, right? Which is that it does things by itself. It can act independently. There are no other tools that we have created that learn on their own, that can make themselves, that can act independently. Right? We're in a really new thing. Many people would think about, and the conventional wisdom is that what we have here is a power tool for information workers, and that's going to be the center of the target. That'll be where the biggest impact zone is. I think that misses the point, which is it is true that the early applications that are derivative from the chatbot instantiation of AI, that's the sort of the first thing that's come to us, kind of written text for the most part. 70% of the first wave applications are tool-like. Think about it as super Google, right? But the 30% that are not, that are agent-like, really, that's the peek into the future. What's really dramatic and what's going to make this super different is the fact that it is the agentic property of AI. The ability to act autonomously act independently, and make decisions.
What would be an example of that today? Or where would an agent be doing something like that today?
It would be doing something like that today. Let's think about defense applications, where we know that you can drive a car independently. It turns out you can also fly a plane independently.
One that you would fly in?
Not now, but soon. In other words, you got to remember when automatic elevators were introduced, people wouldn't get in the elevator.
That's right.
Without the attendant.
That's right.
Right? But people got over it. And the reality on the cars is Waymo today is doing 400 to 500,000 rides a week, from 10 to 20 million rides this year, and it's already 10 times safer than having a driver in the vehicle. So we have all the data. Cars are already better. Planes in some ways are easier because there's not as much traffic up there. But here's what's different. What's different is that, think about that agent application. It's not just a driver, but now think about it in a defense context where it can choose a target. It can also choose to fire.
Wow.
That's a little bit scary.
Of course. And so that's why I'm saying it raises the stakes. What we have here is completely unprecedented.
And is this the reason why you say it's going to take longer? So I think you said at the beginning it's going to be more profound, but it's going to take longer than many people expect. The Waymo example, if Waymo's 10 times safer, why isn't it everywhere today?
Let's think about it. You know, there are all kinds of great historical precedents, right? We invented cars, right? And you think, okay, well, great. Why doesn't everybody buy a car? That's a way better way to get around. There were no roads and there were no gas stations.
And they were expensive.
Relatively, and they kind of broke down a lot and so forth. But my point being is that it took a long time for us to have the infrastructure to fully utilize and make real the promise of independent transportation offered up by the car. When they invented television, right, you know what people did? They read radio scripts while people watched. It took a while to learn how to use the thing. And AI will be very similar in the sense that today we don't have the law for copyright. We don't have a system around security. We don't have kind of an agreed upon governance for how do you utilize it. We don't have rules for where cars can drive, so full agentic, think about it in a medical context, right? Where you're going to have robots doing operations. Right now it's doctor runs it, but there's no reason they need to, right?
So what you're saying is that fundamentally the technology is outrunning our ability to internalize it, to metabolize it. So, I think there's a statistic that says that, when ChatGPT 2 first came out in 2019, it could handle a task that a human would, it would say a 10-second task. Now, I think it's forecast that by 2027, the technology might be able to handle a week's worth of tasks. But we are not yet able to metabolize that because of all of the things that are required to actually fully take advantage of that.
Well, you think about in a business setting, the technology needs to fit inside of an organic organization. It might have 1,000 people or 10,000 people. So it has to work with all those people, has to work with all the processes that are unique to that organization, needs to understand the culture, has to fit in and understand all the data. And so you've got legal issues, you've got cultural issues, you've got technology infrastructure. In the same way that the car didn't have roads, for that AI to work, it needs data. In other words, you can ask it about life out there in the world, but if you want to ask about your customers, right, and your employee who's out in Topeka, or your business partner, it needs to know about that and the nature of those relationships. All of which needs to be taught.
I have so many questions from what you just said. One, as a former policymaker, one of the things I observe is that policy is late. We are generally not that good in this country at anticipating what the policy framework needs to be and how to balance all that. We're instead trying to deal with the consequences of innovation. Maybe that is as it has to be. But is there a way policymakers today, in your view, should be thinking about some of these guardrails around how we develop responsible AI, how we enable it to flourish without having... Talk about that.
Yes. I think the most important framework for policymaking is to think of the technology not as the sort of disembodied, next generation widget, right? It's not a weapon, it's not a gun, it's not a car. You've got to think of it as a digital person, capable of doing all the things a person does. And by the way, think about the uproar over immigration. Think about digital immigrants. Think about very, very low-cost labor. Think about some digital person who's happy to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and doesn't require benefits, doesn't complain about its bonus, etc. That's what we're dealing with. And think about, we were talking earlier about the impact of cheaper labor in China when you're trading. Well, imagine if the labor comes here and what those implications are.
Pete Buttigieg said recently, we're talking about whole categories of jobs where not in 30 or 40 years, but in 3 or 4, half of the entry-level jobs might not be there. It'll be a bit like what I lived through as a kid in the industrial Midwest when trade and automation sucked away a lot of auto jobs in the 90s, but 10 times, maybe 100 times more disruptive. Do you think it's that scary?
Sure. Yes.
And we missed that. I mean, from a policymaking perspective, there were many benefits to outsourcing and offshoring, but there were a lot of people left behind, and we didn't do a great job of dealing with that, did we?
No, and well, the difference there is that the trade impact benefited most consumers a little, and it hurt a group of employees, primary manufacturing employees, a lot. So you had a concentrated harm and a very broad-based, but in a sense, hard to feel benefit. In the form of less expensive goods and more of them, right? But here, the benefits are going to largely flow to the owners and the users of AI. And unfortunately, some of the impacts will be very broad-based.
How do you advise the enlightened CEO, the enlightened policymaker to get ready for these kinds of disruptions? And maybe more to the point, how do we as a society help people benefit from what AI can do and not just fear it as a thing that's going to change the way things work?
Yeah, I don't think there's a reason to be fearful that the technology is inherently bad for labor or for the economy in the sense that it's highly disruptive. But I would just I'm going to come back to your question, but I would just say it is useful to remember we've seen already the actor strike last year, right, was largely about AI, the IP rights and so forth. The longshoremen, right, largely about automation. And so people understand it. You go back 200 years, sounds like a long way back, but the Luddites weren't wrong. People make fun of them, right? But they were absolutely correct. When they automated the looms, what happened, people forget that not only that there were so many protests, those protests became capital crimes. It was so disruptive to society because so many people were put out of jobs. Over 30 years, 80% of the weavers lost their jobs, and wages went down 60% in the space of, I think it was only 5 or 6 years. So it can have, a significant impact. And the problem that you had back then was that there was no social safety net. It took them a generation. This happened in 1805, 1810, 1820. It was not until really the 40s and 50s that they had the Factory Acts that provided relief and respite. So we can't wait a generation to be responsive. What you hope is that the organizations which are experiencing the big productivity bumps use the extra hours of available capacity to build new products. When they introduced ATMs, everybody thought that bank employment would go down and that tellers were going to have to walk the plank. But what actually happened is that the employment of retail bank employees went up, and actually the number of retail banks, the number of locations went up because it became much cheaper to service them. The difference this time around is that imagine if the ATM, while it's at the bank, learned how to underwrite loans, take deposits, open 401ks, because that's the difference, right? In the old days, when you introduced a new technology, it freed up capacity and so forth. But here, the machine is learning, and as it gets more fully integrated in your business, can do more. And so it's going to take more active planning on the part of senior management to redeploy the talent and the capabilities of the employee base.
Have you seen examples of that? Have you seen senior management who are active in the way you described?
For sure, yeah. I'll give you a good example where I was on the board. I'm no longer on the board, so I'm not tooting their horn, but telling their story at Boston Scientific, big medical device company. And over the last 15 years, they have every year set targets for productivity improvement. So this predates AI, but they've used all kinds of different things. And what they do is of course, they've continued to grow. They've continued to grow the employee base. They've continued to grow the count. But every year, they're saying, look, we think we can get X amount of productivity improvement in how we build projects, how we use our R&D, how we build devices, all phases of the business, and set very specific targets for that productivity improvement and budget. Not like we hope this will happen, but we're planning for this to happen. And that additional capital that gets freed up is used to fund growth. New things that we can invest in. It could be R&D, it could be sales employees, it could be M&A activity. But the point is that they have a very direct view, is that we are going to become more productive in order to fuel the investment to underpin the growth of the business.
I think what I'm hearing you say is that they developed this muscle before there was an AI.
But it's very dependent on using new technology. Yep. And so what I was saying is that for a senior management team, as you think about, okay, we're going to use agents to improve our call centers. What are we going to do with that? We're going to save X amount of money here. What are we going to do with that capital? Are there retraining opportunities? Are there other things that we want to invest in? Let's go get that, but let's take and use the savings and the efficiencies and the productivity improvements to make our business better, kind of one. And two, you've got to treat it not as a disconnected thing, not like I'm going to have some AI, tincture of AI, like it's a marketing thing that you're doing.
Yes.
But rather, what are we going to do structurally to make our business better? And you must, before you buy any technology or use it, you must have to think about what's this going to do? Is it going to make my customer relationship better? Is it going to help me improve product delivery? Is it going to decrease my manufacturing cost? How is it going to help? You have to be really crisp on the use case and then manage it like you would manage any other process.
And do you worry, a lot of folks, and I think we've seen in the press recently, a lot of CEOs are talking about the cost savings that could come from AI. And if you improve a workflow, maybe you need fewer people to do it. I think what you're saying is, sometimes that creates an opportunity to put those same people to better use. Sometimes it frees up resources to do other things to serve your customers better, to fundamentally augment the value proposition of your company. But do you worry about this sort of reflexive nature of our economy, that sort of people go to cost first because that's the simplest thing? It's an easy thing to understand. It's the kind of thing that you can see measurable results more quickly.
Yes, of course. And it will be a great temptation, but it's not different. I would say you have to be careful not to tar and feather AI, because it's not different than outsourcing your cafeteria function. It's not different than choosing to manufacture in Vietnam or China or Mexico. It just simplifies things and makes it real when you think about it as a digital person that you can make more of and have all you want, effectively. So thinking about how that is going to work in your company, not for a project, but for the rest of your professional career. I think a lot of people are imagining this is something like paving the parking lot. We have to capital budget. We're going to buy some of this AI stuff. All the senior guys are going to get a license. They're all going to be smarter. We're going to do more things. Money will rain from heaven. Nonsense, right? It's complete nonsense. It's a new piece of functionality and will permanently change what is possible about running any organization. By the way, a nonprofit, government, as well as for-profit companies.
Dave, I'd love to just move for a moment to your work at Baypine.
Yeah.
So Baypine was founded on the idea that old economy companies, there's a big opportunity for them to upgrade their technologies to keep pace with things like AI. Can you share anything that you've learned about the imperatives for some of these sort of more traditional companies and what they're doing? Obviously, the tech companies tend to lead the way with these things, but what are the more everyday old economy businesses, and what do they need to do?
Yeah, it might be useful just to give your listeners a sense, which is that the tech economy, all of semiconductors, all of computing, all of software, all of social media, Take that all together, it's 10% of GDP. So the rest of the economy is 90%. Yeah. And so it's really important. And what is so remarkable and important about AI is that it's going to affect that rest of the economy in very profound ways. And so the idea behind Baypine was that all of these senior leadership teams that may have built a great bank or an organic juice company or a healthcare services business, they're really great at marketing. They're really great at brand building. They're really great at, organizational value creation. But they're not technologists. Didn't grow up doing that. And yet they're very smart business people. They understand the importance and the potential. They just don't know where to start, right? And so we felt that there would be a significant opportunity for a technology fluent capital partner where we would show up with a checkbook and a playbook about how to use and take advantage of this kind of new body of technology.
And what have you learned over 5-6 years of doing that?
Well, first of all, we've learned that the strategy is very appealing. I mean, it is exactly as I described it. Everybody gets that there's an opportunity for better digital marketing, better e-commerce, better data science, instrumented supply chains, and of course, AI, right? So everyone understands it, but no one really knows how to do it. And so we've seen tremendous demand around it, plenty of opportunities. And unusually, to give you a sense of it, over half of the things in our pipeline are people who've come to us, which is a very unusual thing in the investment industry. Usually you're knocking on doors and saying, hey, look, are you interested in investing? But half the time it works the other way around. So that's kind of one. Second thing we've really learned on the implementation side of things is that there's no substitute for focus. And that for it to work well, you need CEO sponsorship, because that sort of sets the tone for the organization. Then you need a point. CEO can't be doing this all day, every day. You need we call it a chief transformation officer. It might be the chief marketing officer. It might be the CTO, so on and so forth. But a chief transformation officer who's going to be the point person for everything that you do technology.
Now, you've done a lot through the Roux Institute to help get people tech literate here in Portland, Maine. Can you say a little bit about that and also just your sort of framework for what advice you'd offer to individuals so that they can be on the right side of this? I mean, you're helping companies to be on the right side of this, and I think through Roux you're helping individuals, but what general advice would you offer along those lines?
Well, what I would say is that people are going to be most valuable in the age of AI, not when they fight it, but when they manage it. And so you're not going to be able, in the same way that you can't outrun a locomotive and you can't outlift a crane, you're not going to be able to outsmart an AI model, count higher, handle complex calculations faster. So you have to think, what is it that becomes more valuable in the age of AI? And I think what you'll see is that what becomes more valuable is collaboration, teamwork, and kind of real novelty, net new. Because the nature of AI is that it's learned from all the things that came before.
Yes.
It doesn't know about the future.
It's backward looking.
I mean, it's really, really good at backward looking.
Yes, no.
It's the greatest rearview mirror ever created.
Yeah. You can teach a model with a lot of data to recognize patterns, even ones that have eluded human discovery, mere mortal discovery, and to build on those models. How do you teach it ethics? How do you teach it to make a judgment?
Well, I mean, there's whole departments, as you probably know, inside all of the foundation model vendors around alignment, right? Where you try to share a set of its etiquette, its values. But the problem with the models is they don't just learn what you teach it. In the same way that your kids don't just learn what you tell them, they also learn from what they see you do and what they see happen in the world around them. And the models are the same way. XAI had a problem with Nazi references in their new model, Grok. It's not that they taught it that, right? They're horrified. Wasn't that at all. It's that the model went out and saw in all of the world around it the Nazi references, bad behavior, so on and so forth. So there's bad behavior in the world. The model's going to see that.
Right. So where does where does a company, where does an individual insert human judgment, better judgment, ethical judgment? Or do you, because it's the model, to your point, it's a digital person.
Digital person. In the same way that, think about, let's say Amazon has 1 million robots, which is about what they have. By the way, they have more robots than people in their warehouses now. Imagine if you're the mayor of a town with 25,000 people. Do you have a jail? Yes, you do. 50,000 people, you go to jail. Now, there's always a percent of the population that's going to misbehave. There's going to be a percent of models and so forth that misbehave. They won't be perfect because they are based in some fundamental way on a reflection of society. Highly structured, maybe a little bit more fluid, hyper capable, but I don't think you're going to be able to stamp, so we're going to need a digital jail for the misbehaviors.
And are you fundamentally, maybe we'll close on this, are you fundamentally hopeful, Dave?
Super hopeful. Yeah. No, I'm super hopeful. I think that it's a fantastic opportunity, but I'm also very clear-eyed about the need we have as a society to ameliorate some of the harm that will come with the broad-based implementation, some of the structural adjustments, and particularly some of the structural adjustments that will happen in the labor force.
Well, David, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been a wonderful conversation. So, Deval, what struck me most about Dave's perspective was just how structural he thinks this moment is. I mean, he's saying this is like steam engine level stuff. This is something maybe even bigger than that, which really struck me.
Yeah, he's such an organized thinker and kind of methodical thinker. What I appreciated is that he was able to hold these two ideas at once. One is the one we hear a lot about, how potentially profoundly disruptive this new technology will be and has been already, the biggest economic and labor transformation maybe ever in history. But at the same time, he says it's unlikely to be as sudden, that it's more gradual. It takes us human beings time to metabolize these changes. Now, gradual is a relative thing when it comes to AI. I doubt it's going to take a generation or two based on what we've seen. But those two things at once, the notion that our experience with AI is going to play out not over one election cycle or one business cycle. It's going to take us a minute to internalize and get the best out of. I
will say that I think that's how we're going to experience it, because it's not like Factory Town X closes up shop the next day, because it's hitting specific job categories. It's actually hitting functions within specific job categories. So it feels more diffuse and dispersed. I'm not sure that it means it's less sudden. It might just feel less sudden because you can't sort of point to factory closing down.
If you're the one who loses his or her job, it's pretty damn sudden to you.
Yeah.
It's hard to have that perspective. Frankly, if you're sitting there with a proverbial pink slip because AI handed to you by a bot, because what you've been doing 8 to 10 hours a day can be done and now is done by a machine. But there's a real space here between what technology can do and what institutions and employers and government and individuals are ready to have it do. And I think trying to get those things aligned, I didn't hear Dave to be minimizing disruption. I did get a sense that there's a broader impact here than anything we've ever seen, but we are not preparing for it when we can. In other words, we don't have to be overtaken by this by the brilliant new device.
Well, that'll lead seamlessly into our final episode for season 1, which will be kind of reflections. One other thing, just on the Dave Roux episode specifically, this idea of AI as a person or a digital person, and that you'll be sort of managing these people. Does that change at all, Deval, how you think about, what sorts of policies you might use to contain AI?
Well, it certainly ought to. I still struggle with the question of who is responsible for these policies. Where do they emanate from? And but it feels like we talk about AI as if it's happening to us, rather than it's a thing we make decisions about, how it's deployed. A decade or two ago, I remember being in a defense-related briefing, and the person talking about it was about the defense bill, was talking about the use of cyber weapons and drones. This is, early days. And, the notion that you can make a drone to take an aerial photograph of your house, that's one thing, but having a drone with a weapon attached to it and then making judgments about how to use that capability, deploy that capability is profound. And it's really, really hard for me not to think about our responsibility in confining, restraining, directing that digital person that AI is going to be.
Even harder than raising kids. That's all the time we have for now. We look forward to hopefully having you join us on the next episode where we actually do a recap of this first season. But that's all from my partner, Deval.
Over and out to you and to our listeners, Warren. Thank you.
See you all next time.
And now to this week's news. Here's one, Warren. AI spending, not AI, is triggering job cuts. Business magazine Fast Company reports massive AI infrastructure spending is the likely culprit for recent layoffs in the tech sector, not the AI technology itself. Companies that are spending a lot on AI with no significant increases in revenue can try to sustain profitability by cutting costs, and that means cutting jobs. Here's a quote: "We're running out of simple ways to secure more funding. Cost cutting will follow," says Pratik Ratadia, head of product at AI startup Durance, writing on X. What do you think about that?
It's interesting. I think what the article implies is that AI's failure is actually hurting humans more than AI's success would. That the lack of progress on meeting the goals is drawing up more rational funding, and so people are cutting heads. That strikes me as a really unfortunate doom loop. And if we are in any kind of a bubble, I think it would largely be because of things like that. But it ties in directly, Deval, with another piece of news. So there is yet more evidence that businesses are failing so far to achieve value from their AI efforts. So there was an MIT Media Lab study a few months ago that said that something like 95% of Gen AI pilots have not succeeded in adding meaningful value to companies. But another survey came out recently by Atlassian. It concluded that 96% of businesses have not seen dramatic improvements in organizational efficiency, innovation, or work quality. Now, I wonder whether these studies are to some degree overstated. There have certainly been others that suggest a slightly more optimistic picture. But the picture overall is one of real struggle to deploy AI effectively. Now, I've got a thesis about why this is happening.
What's that, Warren? I can tell by your expression you're just dying to say what it is.
I am, which is that people think of AI and tech solutions as primarily tech solutions that should be deployed by tech, and once the tech is working, everything else follows. But they ignore the humans in that process. And ultimately, as we've seen time and time again with our guests, and I think we're seeing time and time again in the evidence, if you think AI is primarily a tech thing and you ignore the human, you will fail. There's a lot of reasons for this. The first is the simplest one, which is humans are required to deploy AI tech. But if you think of it more broadly, if you think of technology primarily as tools, it's like the chainsaw doesn't cut down the tree. It's the human with the chainsaw. And of course, that's a lot easier than using a handsaw. But the technology itself doesn't do it. If you don't teach the human how to wield the chainsaw, if the human doesn't want to, it ain't going to help at all. And I think this is one of the things that people are running into, which is one of the areas that gives me hope for how this might affect the future of work. Because if you require humans' cooperation, you've got to find a way to bring them along.
Well, I think you're saying you're hopeful that most of these experiments and pilots are failing. It'll be a slower kind of experience of integrating AI into our work. I do think that there is a kind of a feeling you get sometimes that you had to spend a lot of money on the necessary trial and error that goes with a new technology in order to figure out where its highest and best use would be, instead of integrating more of the worker's point of view and experience into tailoring your trial, which I think is consistent with where you are. And I think businesses will find this out. Let's see. I've got one for you. Universities need more AI, not less. Colleges must teach AI skills before their graduates fall behind. Writing recently in the Wall Street Journal op-ed pages, Dr. Jerry Ballantyne, president of New York Institute of Technology, argued universities must teach their students to, quote, learn how to learn, close quote, to adapt to disruptive technologies like AI. He said many college and university leaders fret that AI will destroy college writing or kill higher education. This fear of AI is misplaced, he believes, even dangerous. AI isn't going anywhere. It's already an essential tool for the modern economy, and excommunicating it from the classroom would leave graduates unprepared for the future. What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting. This notion of learn to learn, I think, is a really important one. In fact, that is the motto of my children's school, is learn to learn. And I actually think that's a really helpful frame for this question, because if you see education primarily as the ingestion and regurgitation of data and information, then of course you think of AI in one way. But if you think of it as a process where you learn to be a critical thinker, then AI actually can be a very useful tool. And this is one of the areas where in my own experience, I found it extraordinarily helpful. If you have an idea, testing it and bouncing it off of AI and getting AI's reaction and to make your idea more robust and more clear, it can be extraordinarily powerful. Or if you're trying to write something and you make a first draft and then you actually ask AI to give you suggestions about how you could improve it, or maybe data that you may have missed. These are really cool uses that actually stimulate greater thought. But if all you do is outsource your thinking to AI, you're not going to learn anything.
That's it. And I think that explains both why Dr. Ballantyne's admonition is right and also where the anxieties come from on university campuses. This notion that you're just outsourcing your own thinking to the tool. And you don't have any agency in it. You don't have any engagement beyond that. That is a worry. And I can say, as someone who has been in front of a classroom, when the student came to me and said, I can show you an answer to your pop quiz in your voice by asking AI. Yeah, how about that? It was like, just bring me an apple, man. You don't have to suck up like that.
Do you give better grades when people bring you an apple?
At the school where I taught, when someone appealed the A- I had given them in the course, I thought, I'm done.
Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for joining us on AI Unplugged with my host and friend, Deval Patrick.
Good to be with you, Warren. And thanks, everybody, for joining us for another episode of AI Unplugged. We'll see you next time.